Before I get started, let me say something about Christmas Day. I gave this to Tim for the announcements, but I don't know why I can't explain it myself. We are having services Christmas Day, which is on a Wednesday this year, same time, 7 o'clock. And because so many of our folks are traveling, we may have visitors here and a lot of our own folks gone, we're not going to have our usually scheduled classes. We're going to have a special service. Well, we just had a special service before Thanksgiving, and so to do the same thing would be fine, I'm sure. But we wanted to do something a little different, but also it had to be something that would accommodate the situation that we're expecting Christmas, which is an audience composed of we don't know who. So we hope that all of you will be here for that. But here's the plan that we've come up with. And we've done this before. I look back at my records, and I think we did this in 2013 for a special occasion. We're going to sing and talk about our favorite hymns. And by our favorite hymns, I mean this church's favorite hymns. And I'm going to take the top 8 or the top 10, something like that. But to compile that list, I need to start getting your votes, for lack of a better term. You can vote many times as you want, and the way that you can do it, you can hand me a list. You can tell me, but I will probably forget them. You can email them to me, which is probably the best way to do it, or you can text them to me. And if you'll get those to me, we can work on that tonight. We'll mention it again Sunday, and then Christmas. When's Christmas? In a week? A week from Wednesday? Jackson, I got to start buying some presents, man. We're coming up on it, so if you can get those coming, then we'll have something put together, and you can see what we classify as our favorite hymns. We'll sing some great songs in worship to God and get some meaning as we look into their background and their spiritual applications as well. I think it'll be a good time that we'll have together, and a profitable time, spiritually speaking. This is one of those end of the year Sunday night services where it's really dark and the weather's not great outside. And it's the middle of cold and flu season, so a lot of our folks are gone. The young people are away on an area-wide youth trip, and it just, I look out on this crowd and I'm filled with gratitude to you because it's a real honor to have people come and listen to you speak. I mean, sometimes I come and I'm surprised that there are people here because y'all, some of you have been listening to me 4 times a week this quarter. And it's a real honor, and I don't take it lightly that you come on nights like tonight to hear a lesson from God's Word. And it's been 19 years that I've been here doing this, and I count it a real honor and a privilege to do this. So thank you for being here this evening. We're going to talk about God and money, and our text for this evening is Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, very familiar passage. Here's what the Lord said: "No one can serve 2 masters, for he will either hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." Now we know the word the Lord actually said there in place of money is mammon, which is an Aramaic term that has to do with wealth, or that to which one puts his trust. That's the literal idea behind the Aramaic term mammon. Pops up in one of Lord Byron's lines that I love very much, which says that mammon wins his way where seraphs might despair. Mammon, wealth, dares to go into places where seraphs, those are angels, might not even dare go, which tells you how influential money and possessions and material abundance can really be. That's why it's important for us to talk about it this evening. And on many occasions, the Lord Jesus addressed money many, many times, quite frequently, and so should we. Now, I realize that a lot of people come to services like this and they realize we're talking about money, and they may say, well, why doesn't the preacher stay out of my pocketbook? Why is he talking about money all the time? The church should be talking about spiritual matters, and when I come to church, I want to think about heaven, I want to think about judgment, I want to think about Jesus, I want to think about morality, and then I can think about money and material wealth the other 6 days of the week. But you can't compartmentalize your life like that. You just can't do it. It doesn't work that way. Just imagine going to your doctor's office complaining about general bad health. You're tired, you're not sleeping well, you don't feel good, you never feel good, and you want to get down to the bottom of it, so he orders the usual battery of tests, diagnostics, but he sits down and he also wants to have a conversation with you, and it goes something like this. He asks, what have you been eating? What are your eating habits? What are your sleeping habits? What kind of exercise have you been getting? What kind of activities have you been involved in? Are you smoking? Are you drinking? What's going on in your life? Now, would you look at your doctor and say, listen, I'm not here for a psychology exam. I'm not here for you to preach me a lesson on morality. You deal with my physical body, and I'll take care of the rest of the things at other places. No, you wouldn't say that. If you did say that to your doctor, he would say, you can't compartmentalize your life that way, because your mind and your soul is intermingled with your body. Spiritual and material things interact with one another in ways that affect the health on both sides. That's why Jesus talked about money so much. You can't compartmentalize your life where your money stays over here and your soul stays over here, and never the twain shall meet. It just doesn't work that way. And so Jesus gives us some very important teaching here that will introduce to us three important truths. And here's the first one. The first one is you can't serve two masters. You can't serve two people at one time. It's kind of like the old 1980s sitcom plot where this young teen idol has two dates on the same night. What do I do? And it's just this total failure because you can't do both at the same time. You have to choose one or you choose the other. Jesus says you can't serve two masters. Somebody might say, I can serve two masters. I live with my wife and my mother-in-law, so I'm doing both at the same time. But that's a very different situation. Somebody might say, well, I'm working two jobs, so I have two bosses. That's two masters. It's a very different thing than what Jesus is talking about here, because he's using some words that should cue us into the idea here. And one of the important terms here, one of the key words in Matthew 6:24 is the word other, from the Greek heteros. Other has to do with that which is of a completely different quality or character. So he's not talking about like having two bosses, two employers, or living with two family members who have ideas about how things should be done, who are similar in the same category. He's talking about two completely different masters from two different realms at opposite ends, opposite poles from one another. And he says you can't run back and forth from one pole to the next and successfully serve those two masters. Another key word here is the verb serve, which is derived from the noun doulos, which has to do with a slave. So this isn't about partial devotion, but 100% devotion, because a slave is viewed as property. It's like the farmer's plow or his cow. A slave belongs to the master. And so slave has to do with 100% devotion. You are all in. There's no room in your allegiance to serve somebody else. It's not 80% serving this one person or 20% serving the other. It's 100% in one direction, no room for another master at all. And so no one can serve two masters. not in the way that Jesus is talking about here. Again, another good text on this is Romans chapter 6, verse 16, where Paul announces that everybody is a slave of some kind, but you're not the slave of two different people at the same time. Here's what he says in Romans 6:16. Do you not know that if you present yourselves to anyone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one whom you obey, either of sin which leads to death or of obedience that leads to righteousness? And so on one end of the spectrum you have sin. Sin leads to death. And these two polar opposites are throughout the end of Romans chapter 6. If you keep reading down, you see him repeat these terms again and again and again. You have sin, sin, sin. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have obedience or righteousness. He flip-flops between those back and forth. Righteousness on one end, sin on the other. And you can choose one or the other, but you can't serve sin and righteousness at the same time because they're completely other from one another. They're polar opposites. They're different qualities. They have different character. You have to choose one or the other. We're all slaves, but we can't be slaves to two things at the same time. And you ask, well, who am I serving? Who is my master? And I think Peter settles that question pretty simply in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 19, when he says, whatever overcomes a person, to that he is enslaved. So whatever overcomes you, whatever you devote all your time and energy and money to, that's your master. And it's a pretty objective test. You can check your life really quickly and do some self-examination, discovering the answer to the question, who am I serving? Who is my master? But you won't find two, just one. You can't serve two masters. Now here's the second important truth we get from Matthew 6:24. Number 2, choosing wealth will ruin you. If you choose wealth, it's the wrong direction. It will ruin you. And in order to set that up, I want to share with you a number of truths about wealth. And here's the first one. Wealth is morally neutral. It's not inherently evil. There are many passages of Scripture that talk about it in the context of sin and of temptation, but money itself is a neutral object. It's a tool. It's not inherently sinful. And I know that can be confusing because you have phrases like unrighteous wealth, Luke 16:9, or deceitfulness of riches, Matthew 13:22, or dishonest gain, 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 8, and the qualifications of elders. And so you have all of these moral terms attached to the wealth, but that's not to say that the wealth itself is morally in one direction or another. It's neutral. So what's the explanation? Why does it pop up in so many sinful contexts? Paul answers that question in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 9 and 10. Here's what he says. Those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. Now he doesn't say money is the root of all evil. What he says is the love of money, the worship of money, is the root of all kinds of evils. It's a craving that will pierce your soul and lead you to ruin and destruction. So it's not the money itself. Money is a tool, but it's falling in love with it, worshiping it. Okay, so here's the second observation we want to make. Secondly, money does not determine contentment. There's no amount of money in the world that will make you happy. In fact, quite the contrary, if you look at the evidence, it seems that some of the most miserable people on earth have the most money. So you can't equate contentment with the amount of money in your bank account. And Jesus put it simply in Luke 12:15, a man's life does not consist of the abundance of his possessions. You can't, add up your money and equal your life. That's just not how it works. In Philippians 4, Paul is writing from a prison cell, and he says, I've learned to be content in whatever situation that I am in. He says, I know how to have abundance. I know how to live in poverty. Either way, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. It's not about how much you have. Number 3, money has a way of introducing temptation into our lives. The wise man Agur wrote this in Proverbs chapter 30, verses 8 and 9. He says, give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me, lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God. And so there's a set of temptations introduced to you when you're poor, and there's a set of temptations that are introduced into your life when you have an abundance. And Agur says, if I could choose it, I'd rather be right down the middle, not poor, not wealthy, just having enough. That's probably the path of least resistance, is what he's saying there. Which leads me to a 4th observation. And this is according to the Lord Jesus. It's harder to go to heaven with a lot of money. He says after the rich young ruler turned away sorrowful because he was rich, he says it's harder for a camel to go through the eye of a needle and for a rich person to enter into the kingdom of heaven. Now, the disciples said, well, who can be saved? And he said, with man this is impossible. With God all things are possible. So they didn't say it's impossible for a rich man to go to heaven. He just said it's hard because of the added temptations. Prosperity adds responsibility. Prosperity also adds temptations. And that's not to say there aren't temptations that go along with having a little or having not enough. There's a different set with those, but there's a special set of problems that come along with wealth. Here's a 5th observation. A proper way to view wealth is through the principle of stewardship. Now, stewardship is basically the idea that God owns everything, and what I have, He has given me to manage for Him. So He's watching the way that I use my possessions to see if I'm a good steward. That's the best way to look at the Bible's teaching on wealth. It's not evil in and of itself, but it's on loan from God to use it for His glory, to His purposes. And so you could look at a good steward would try to save on taxes, for example, not so he can improve his status, but so he can do more for the Lord's work with his money. A good steward would look at it that way. A good steward would try to avoid high prices on something, or try to set up a good budget, be responsible with his spending so that he can do more for the Lord with his money. It's a tool that he uses to glorify God. That's how the Bible's teaching on wealth goes. It can be summed up in the word stewardship. Now, serving mammon, serving money, is the wrong choice. It will ruin you, as we said. And why is that? Well, you can look at the words of the Lord in Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21, which precede our text. Before He said, you cannot serve God and money. Choose one or the other. Money will ruin you. Before He said that, He said, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break through and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. He's basically saying you become what you worship. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And if your treasure is in things that break down, or things that get stolen, or things that disappear, things that are temporal, then you become like that. You become perishable. You become ruined. You become destructible. However, if you put your hopes and your praise to the things on high, and you set your mind on things above, then you become like things above, incorruptible, pure, indestructible, dwelling with God where He is in heaven. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. The same sentiments in Romans 6 that we looked at a moment ago. He says in verse 23, as he reaches his conclusion, that the wages of sin is death, okay? Well, that puts it very simply, but if you back up, he makes a more subtle point, and he's making the same point that we saw in Matthew 6, which is you become what you worship. Look at verse 19 of Romans 6. He says, just as you once presented your members as slaves to impurity and to lawlessness, leading to more lawlessness. So you presented yourselves as slaves to lawlessness. What did that lead to? More lawlessness. How does that work? Lawlessness leads to, I serve lawlessness and I become lawless. It's what you worship. You become what you worship. And the same is true of serving righteousness. He goes on to say, now present your members as slaves to righteousness, leading to sanctification. But that's a parallel verse to verse 16 that we read a moment ago, where he said, if you become servants of obedience, that leads to righteousness. And so he's saying there's, you serve righteousness, you become righteous. You serve lawlessness, you become lawless. It's the same concept we see in Matthew 6, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Whatever you worship, you become. Now, do you want to become money? Do you want to become like that? Do you want to be just an exchange, a tool to get goods and services? People who orient their lives around money see everything in terms of money. Everything is an exchange. People are consumers. People are assets. That's the way they look at the world. And same, you can replace money with other false gods, and people see the world, that people who worship pleasure and look at life through hedonism, everything is about pleasure to them. Everything is short-term, instant gratification. They never think about long-term, never look into things of greater significance. People who worship power and lust for status, that's how they see the world. And people who worship God, they see the world in terms of love. It's the concept you see throughout the Bible. In Psalm 115, verse 8, it pops up again, where the psalmist is mocking people who carve idols and worship idols. And he says, they who worship them become like them. You become like your idol. So choose your master very, very carefully. Choosing wealth will ruin you. But on the other end of this, the third truth that we derive from Jesus' teaching here is that choosing God will save you. Now this passage we're reading from Matthew 6 is repeated in Jesus' teaching in other places. And I want to take you to another example in Luke chapter 16. He says it again in verse 13. If you look at it, he says, no servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. It's almost verbatim. It is verbatim from Matthew 6:24. But it's in a different place in Luke. In Luke, he puts it at the end of a very interesting and complex parable that's often referred to as the parable of the unjust steward, or the parable of the dishonest manager. And it's a parable about a man who has a dishonest manager, and he sees that this manager or steward is wasting his possessions, so he calls for him to come and give an account of what he has done. And this manager or steward, he has to think quickly on his feet. What am I going to do? I'm about to lose my job here, and I don't want to dig ditches, and I'm too proud to beg, so what am I going to do? And he decides, well, I have a list of my master's debtors. I'm going to go make friends with them. And he goes to one debtor that owed his master 100 of something, and he says, write me out 50. And the guy gets it for half price, gets his debt canceled for half price. Goes to another who owes 100. He says, write out 80. So he gets another discount, 20% discount. And he goes around to all the debtors and he makes these deals behind his master's back. He's going to lose his job anyway. And so whenever he is called to give an account and his master finds out about what he's been doing, he actually commends him. Look at verse 8. The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. Jesus says, the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. Now, what does that mean? And how does that carry us to the point about no one can serve two masters? You're going to hate the one or love the other, be devoted to one, despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. How does all of this fit together? Well, there's several applications, actually. Verse 8, going back to that. In verse 8, Jesus laments the fact that the children of this world are wiser with worldly things than the children of God with spiritual things. It goes back, we talked about this last Sunday, be wise as serpents, harmless as doves. We need to be efficient, we need to be clever, we need to be smart with what the Lord has given us to do. But the world is better at that than the church is. God expects us to use our common sense. He expects us to use wisdom. And so the manager didn't commend the lies and the dishonesty. He commended the shrewdness. And it seems that Jesus is commending shrewdness as well. Then you get to verse 9. In verse 9 he says, make friends with yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. That's a puzzling statement as well. Best as I can tell, what he's saying is, use wealth to cement friendships where the real permanent value of life lies. Use your wealth to build relationships in life, not just to surround yourself with things, but give generously to people. Help people out with your wealth. Use it to help others, and that's going to form bonds that you can carry into eternal dwelling places. We talked this morning about things that carry over from this life to the next, our memories, but also our relationships with loved ones. Paul expected a reunion with friends in eternity, and we should expect the same. And so Jesus is saying, use your wealth to cultivate good relationships, along with other things too. It can't just be an exchange system about money. Otherwise you wind up like the prodigal son, and when his money ran out, so did his friends. That's not the kind of relationship Jesus is talking about. But I think we understand where he's going with this. And then look at verses 10 and 11. One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful with the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And so again, very practical, wise information here. He starts out, whoever is faithful in a little, we know he's been tested, he's going to be faithful with much. That's another principle that pops up in other places in Jesus' teaching. And whoever is dishonest or unfaithful with a little, he's going to be dishonest or unfaithful with much. But then he goes on to say, who will entrust to you the true riches? Which brings him to this, you can't serve God and money. This is the answer to the question. Why should I choose God as my master? Because with God, there are the true riches. He's the only one that can offer the real value. Only Him. And this is a phrase you see in variations throughout Scripture. Let me give you some examples. Proverbs 19:17 talks about true riches. Whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and He will repay him for his deed. The poor can't pay you back. Lend expecting nothing in return. Luke chapter 6, verse 35. But God will repay. It's like you're lending to Him. What is that? You're banking on true riches. Here's another example. Matthew chapter 6, verse 20. Lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth nor rust corrupts, and where thieves do not break through and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Lay up treasures in heaven, where moth doesn't corrupt, where thieves don't break through and steal. What kind of place is this? What kind of riches don't corrupt and rot and dissolve away? Those true riches in heaven. He's talking about that again. And one last example at the close of the parable of the rich fool. In Luke 12, verse 21, he says, So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and not rich toward God. To have true riches is to be rich toward God, to have treasures in heaven where moth and rust don't corrupt, where thieves can't steal. That's the true riches, to be rich towards God. It's a hard truth, but the day is coming for all of us when all that we have, our homes, our bank accounts, our clothing, everything will be left to the world, and we go to God and we can't take it with us. So what are we going to have when we face Him on Judgment Day? If we have been laying up true riches, we'll have an abundance to enjoy. But if we have been laying up treasures on earth, we'll have nothing when we face Him, when we come face to face with Him. That's why we say, money as a master will ruin you, but God will save you. He is the greatest master. I don't know if you remember, I think it was in 1999, the golfer Payne Stewart died in a plane crash. And it was a mysterious crash, and it took people a long time to understand what happened. And they said the cause of the problem was depressurization in the aircraft. The depressurization deprived them of oxygen, and the passengers and the pilots just kind of passed out, and the plane went on autopilot until it ran out of fuel and it crashed. It was a tragic accident, but somebody was describing what it's like to die that way through depressurization, and they said it's kind of strange. You become lightheaded. You don't really know what's going on. You actually might even have a sense of peace about you before you become unconscious. And that's probably the state of everyone that was on that aircraft whenever it crashed on that really sad occasion. Well, there's a comparison there to people who think that their lives consist in the abundance of their possessions. They're like depressurized. There's not enough oxygen going to their system. They don't really understand what's going on. They're in an aircraft that's crashing and they feel okay with it. That's what it's like to make your life about money and not be rich toward God. And Christ is waking us up. He's trying to get us to pay attention. You've got two choices here, God and wealth. And wealth will ruin you, but God can save you. Now, who is your master? You're serving someone. We're all the slaves of someone. Which master have you chosen for yourself? Money makes a very poor taskmaster, but God is a benevolent and loving and kind, righteous Father who wants you to be safe, forgiven, and with Him for all eternity. Are you prepared to meet Him? Have you chosen Him? And if not, will you let us help you choose Him tonight, right now, as we stand together and as we sing.